I was looking at that 10,000 or the 10 million game and looking at some images, and just that that tile based sprite art is giving me. I had to look it up. Rodent's Revenge was this game.
Yes, we talked about that before on the podcast.
Wait a minute, we did.
Oh, no, I think it was like in the same context. I think we were like, "What's the name of that game?" We were like trying to think of like
cheese,
Chips
baby.
Challenge.
Yeah, it's so good. Oh,
love that game.
See, but like
played
even
so
that
much of
level
that game.
of like sprite art, I think has so much character to it.
Definitely,
because it's so limited.
Yes.
Ugh.
I see. Yeah, like looking at, I just saw like a picture of like the grid, and it's like, yeah, very generic.
That's the thing, is that like if it was a little bit more stark or even like less polished, then I feel like it would have more.
If
character.
it was like if it was more minimalist, it would be better. I think.
It was
like,
John Darnielle recording a Mountain Goats album on his boom box by shouting into the boom box to record onto the tape, that level of quality, like ages basically perfectly, because there's so low, there's almost no quality to it.
Yeah, there's always like that low level of quality will always exist.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, welcome to Pursuing Pixels. My name's Kevin Portelli, and I'm here tonight with John Hines.
Hey there.
And Randall Nolery.
Hey folks.
And we are back as always to talk about some video games, and I guess as always, at least on my part, squeezing in every year we do a holiday episode, which our holiday episode for this year will be coming up very soon here, if not possibly next week, based on when this episode comes out. But this time, not just me, both Randall and I are cutting it pretty close. I think Randall might have mentioned his resolution game. I kind of got sidetracked there. But yeah, every year we record a holiday episode at the end of the year where we kind of talk about our 3 favorite games that we talked about, not necessarily that came out that year, but that
we
talked about on the podcast over the course of the year or whatever. But also on that episode, we make a resolution, like, hey, our New Year's resolution game, to play for the next year, either something that's been on our back burner or just something that we've been like really wanting to play for a long time, whatever the reason might be. But yeah, both Randall and I are cutting it close. I cut it close last year as well. I think also on like pretty much the last episode before the holiday episode. I think I even had to juggle the episode order around a little bit based on when we recorded them to get mine in. But I played it before the end of the year, so
it counts.
And once again, I'm playing mine before the end of the year this year. And this is one that we've all at least spent some time with. I don't think neither of you fired this up recently. Did you, or did you, John?
I did not. I've been playing. I've been too busy playing Rogue Legacy 2.
Hey, I can't blame you. When we talked about it last week, and again when I was in town visiting you and watching you play some of that, I was like, man, I wasn't even that into the original Rogue Legacy. I liked it fine, but like didn't really pull me in. And I was like, man, I need Rogue Legacy 2. Like I really, especially like it's just so fun to play a rogue like alongside with somebody that is also playing it. Like it reminds me of when DJ Glenn and I were playing Enter the Gungeon, and there was another game that we got pretty into, but Gungeon is just the one that I definitely remember just going, and Downwell, I guess, as well. But Gungeon had more of like the mystery of like, oh, have you unlocked this yet? Or have you done this yet? Or
I think we also did it
whatever,
with Hades.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I guess, yeah. I didn't put enough time into that game. I mean, I played a ton of it, but I never beat it or anything, and that was an amazing game.
Maybe you can make a resolution for it.
Yeah, maybe for next year, maybe next week we'll see what I end up going with. But yeah, I ended up playing some Luigi's Mansion 3, and to be fair, I haven't gotten super far into the game. I've probably played like 2-3 hours. I finally got my Switch hooked up. Been staying with my parents now that I've moved back to Michigan here, and just kind of like for the first month or two, I was kind of like, I'm not gonna unpack all my stuff. It's a little too. Like, I'm going to be moving eventually. And I was like, but I want to play some games and like, I want to have some of my stuff. And I've been like digging through some boxes trying to find my capture card. And I was like, it's in this box. And then I was like, nope, it's not in that one. Went to Chicago recently, picked up a bunch of my stuff from John and I's band's practice space. And like, I was like, oh, it's got to be in one of these. And I dug through them. I was like, nope. And then I'd keep having a revelation like, oh, I think it's in this box. Nope. And then I went out to the garage the other day to grab not a beer, but actually have you guys ever had these poppy sodas? The brand is Poppy. They're kind of like a prebiotic, or I think it's particularly prebiotic as opposed to probiotic. But it's like a sort of a kombucha sort of soda thing, but it's like apple cider vinegar based. But they are fucking addicted to these things, man. They're like, there's a strawberry lemon flavor and a raspberry rose, and they're like, they're better than sodas, but they're so good. There's a few other flavors too. The watermelon, I was a little disappointed with, and I do like watermelon, so I was like, I had high hopes. But anyways, went out there, saw this box, and I had another revelation. I was like, I think the capture card's in there. And I opened it up, and like my Xbox One was in there, the controllers, bunch of my extra cables, found the capture card. So I was like, okay, I'm getting the Switch dock out and I'm hooking it up. Let me hook the capture card. Because I was like, if I do any streams or videos, I'm just going to stick to PC stuff. But I was missing, I was playing Switch handheld here and there, but I was just missing having it hooked up and playing properly. And but before we started recording, I was talking about a few of the games that I've been jumping around to, but the main thing that I fired up initially after I grabbed my copy from Chicago from our band's practice space was Luigi's Mansion 3. I really have never played much of any of the Luigi's Mansion series. I've played a little bit of the first one, and I know I own the second one on 3DS. I can't Dark Moon or whatever it's called. I can't recall if I've played much of it. Like I know I've played a little bit of it here and there, but I think it was mostly the first one on GameCube, the series that is. But yeah, Luigi's Mansion 3, I'm not super far in. I've probably played 3 hours or so. I just got like a little bit past where you like unlock the Gooigi ability, where you can like create like a second like kind of like slime goop version of Luigi that can like pass through different. So like right away I was like, oh man, there was like an area I saw earlier, and I really like how the game is structured. The only thing that's kind of been scaring me off so far is like as soon as I mentioned that I was playing oh my god, walked right into that one.
Yes, did.
But as soon as I mentioned that I was playing this, like in our Discord and whatever, like everyone's like, oh, great gamer on Twitter. I even like just made a post of like a clip from while I was playing, and like right away everyone's like, oh, I love that game, but it overstays its welcome. And I'm like, man, I usually think a game that's like 3 hours overstays its welcome.
Right.
So like I'm a little bit nervous here, but and even just from the little bit I've played and with that context from the people that have kind of chimed in or whatever, I'm like, okay, I can sort of see how I've like cleared 2 or 3 floors of this like hotel, and based on the elevator buttons that are missing that I have to unlock along the way, there's like quite a few more. So it's okay, I can see how this game is going to be like 30, 40 hours. But that said, man, number one, the production values, I think that kind of goes without saying, like for any kind of first party Nintendo title, but especially with this one kind of leaning into the slightly more like cinematic approach, I guess, to the gameplay, because it kind of feels almost more like a point and click adventure, even though there's definitely some action to the gameplay, but just like the structure and the way you kind of explore and kind of break things out one layer at a time, it just kind of has that kind of feel and flavor, but with a little more you have a little more agency as you play the game. You know, there is like kind of action, there's like boss battles and stuff like that that get pretty actiony. But one thing right away that I was really impressed with was like the tutorialization in the game. Like right away, it like kind of has you like teaching you how to use the poltergeist, the vacuum when you first get it. And it kind of like just shows you like the little ghost Poochies like running around. And it's like, hold down this button and you can kind of tell that it sucks Poochie in. Hold down a different button, it blows him away. And then hold down something else and something else happens. And then it's just like, do you feel comfortable with what you've learned? And you can click yes or no. I don't know what happens if you click no, because I was like, oh, nice, I get it. Maybe if you click no, it walks you through like a more step-by-step tutorial or something. But I was just like, man, that's very un-Nintendo. Usually it's like, do this and this, and, you know, walk you through every single step of the process, as opposed to like, oh, do you get it? Nice. Okay, let's move along. And I was pretty impressed with like the onboarding process. I got pretty sucked into like the opening cutscenes, and like I really love like the Virtual Boy like menu system, where like I think it's just called like the VB or something. And like, I don't know, but it's a pretty, one thing, like the first thing I thought was like, this would be a really fun game to play with. Like I've talked about gaming with like my little cousin Drew in the past on the podcast. It's like, this would be really fun to play with him. And it would probably be fun for him to like watch me play. But it is a pretty complex game, like both in the terms of like the
control
puzzle solving, but the control scheme. Yeah, especially whether you're using gyro or not, like using the right stick to like rotate Luigi around either clockwise or counterclockwise, and then point up or down with the flashlight.
Yep.
Juggle between the Poltergeist in the flashlight, and then like juggle between Luigi, which you have to like click on the right stick and then like double click to unactivate. Like there's a lot of tricky stuff going on. And I guess like if you're just getting onboarded into video games, like, hey, this is the first game you play, you might just get it. If it's just walking you through it. But I was like, man, this is pretty complex. I was like, kind of felt like I was battling the controls a little bit. But that said, like, even in like some of the kind of mini bosses that I've faced off with so far or whatever, like I never felt like it was hindering me from like progressing in the game. Like I took some damage here and there, but I wasn't like, oh, I'm about to get a game over. Feels pretty lenient on the difficulty stuff, but I don't know. It's a really good mix of like, I really love exploring. I really love the vibes, like just how like dark, not necessarily like tone, but just like the aesthetic. Like it's so like shadowy. Like it really feels like you're like exploring this kind of like spooky, empty mansion. And like, I don't know. I've really been enjoying it so far. And knowing me, I don't know if I'm going to finish the game realistically, but I want to. Like, there's part of me that's like, man, I really want to play this. And I really want to, because I remember even firing up the original Luigi's Mansion on GameCube and thinking, man, this game looks amazing for that era. Like, and that was a launch title, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. It was kind of like, hey, we don't have a Mario game, so here's this thing. Yep. But yeah, I don't know. Like, the only things that I would maybe complain about, other than like maybe the few nitpicks I've had so far, is like it does. I don't know how much money is going to come into play because I don't even think I've unlocked like the shop just yet. There seems to be like a shop in the menu or when you go to like EGAD's laboratory or whatever. But shoot, I sort of lost my train of thought there.
Money coming into play.
Oh yeah, the money, like, because like there's like coins, like pretty much anything you touch or move, like kind of in this, kind of like when you're playing like Professor Layton and you're just like tapping everywhere on the screen. Like, is there something here? Like, you can just basically just blow your vacuum and your flashlight everywhere, and there's money everywhere, and you can sit around and vacuum everything up. And part of me is like, I don't want to miss any money because I want to buy upgrades or whatever I'm going to need this money for. But at the same time, it's like, do I really need to sit around and find every last dollar bill and coin? Because some of the bills like have this weird like physics to them where you have to like really kind of like suck them in and aim at them perfectly, and it can be a little tedious at times. So like, apart from that aspect of the gameplay, and maybe I'm going to get to the first time I can buy something and go, oh shit, I have way too much money, and because I've pretty much been uncovering and unturning any stone I come across. But I don't know, I'm really enjoying, like, again, like I said, I just got a little bit past where I unlocked Luigi, and I can already think of a few previous locations where I'm like, ooh, I could go through that fence there, or oh, I could sneak through that grate, or maybe I can go through that like fan over here, or I don't know, just like I really like how the game's coming together and like how it's structured and how like each floor of the hotel is almost its own level.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm really liking how the whole package is put together. And again, I don't have a ton of experience with the series. It seems like it's mostly more of the same from what I have seen and played. But I don't know. What do you two both think about, I guess, Luigi's Mansion 3, but the series in general as well?
Well, I guess I was trying to think, because like I meant to play, like, as soon as you mentioned that you were going to play this game, I was like, oh man, I really want to come back to that game, but I really haven't since the last time we talked about it on this podcast, which was probably like 2 years ago at that point.
It's been a while, yeah.
And like honestly, the things that I remember most about it was like, I did love that it was I know that we've kind of said like this as to mean something completely different on this podcast before, but like it is kind of diorama like, where you know everything is set up, but it's an open world diorama, so it's not so much like a self-contained level, which is what 2 was, and I was kind of a little bit disappointed with Dark Moon, where it was like every level was its own instance, so like it would be within the same like level, but you know, maybe this hallway is blocked off or this stairway is inaccessible, and like the same location would be slightly different in each level. So like I really liked having the exploration where it's like, oh no, you just need a new ability to get through this area or defeat this boss or do this sequence of events and it'll unlock the next area. So I liked that aspect of it. But honestly, the thing that like I remember most like as terms of like a nitpick was just like, I remember the menus being really bad or like really like poor quality where I was like, this doesn't seem like a first party Nintendo game like everything else does. But I remember being like entering into the game. I remember like, oh, this feels kind of like, I don't know, like
they do
lean
into that. Well, they do lean into that like Virtual Boy aesthetic a little bit, maybe a little bit too much. Like maybe I haven't dove into the menus enough to feel like I don't recall feeling like it was lacking, but because I did like how you could like look at the map and zoom in and kind of look at your
everything else was
stuff.
Great. So like it was just like something that like stood out to me where I was like, yeah, that just seems weird that like in a game where everything else seems like so like stylized that like that was the thing that I remembered, but it's such a weird thing to remember. I don't know.
The only time Nintendo acknowledges the Virtual Boy after its death, and it's for something like that when it's like the worst part of the game.
Yep.
Where's my 3DS Virtual Boy games? God damn it!
Yeah, give me that Virtual Console, baby.
Side rant.
Yeah, but what about you, Randall? What's your Luigi's Mansion experience, whether with 3 or the series?
I played a lot of. Well, I don't know about a lot. I got to like 4 or 5 floors, I want to say, back when it came out, whenever that was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I did try to pick it back up when I went to the Portland Retro Gaming Expo. That was another game that I brought with me.
Nice.
And I popped that in a little bit, but I'm like, ooh, man, this control scheme, I got to get
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's probably a tough one to just like pick up. That's part of me is like, if I'm going to keep playing it, I better keep doing it now because I'm not. There's no way I'm going to come back to this one 6 months later.
No, yeah, that's a little bit of a rough on ramp again there. And then I'm like, oh no, and which way was I supposed to go? Did I already explore all of this?
I wasn't even thinking about just the where have I been yet. I mean, it does have like an objective. Like if you pause, there's like it just shows you what your next objective is. But if you haven't played in a year, that's probably not going to help you out that much because they're sort of vague. It's not like just strictly go here,
right?
And it's not like. At least when you're playing the story in the game, it's not like, you're going directly to the next floor on this level. It's like, this like unlocked this secret path that leads between floors or something. So you kind of, I can't imagine.
Yes.
Yeah. It definitely has me worried again with how everybody's instant reaction was great game, really long. And I'm like, oh man, that I'm already like just seeing all the empty elevator buttons. I'm just like, oh my God. And the floors I'm assuming are only going to get bigger and more complex and tougher puzzles. And but it's really fun.
So
like,
good. I really do want to get back to it, but I don't know.
Well, it's really fun. Like, cause it's kind of weird playing a Nintendo game that's like really kind of set piece driven,
Yeah.
So like it is like, I mean, you can explore around pretty freely, almost open world style, like you said, but like you
got to solve each set before you can really move around.
Yeah. You are kind of like restricted to going in the certain order and like triggering certain events to happen or certain boss battles. I don't know. It just like, the way it guides you through the game is really cool. I'm really enjoying like the pacing and I don't know. It's just not often you play a Nintendo game. And because it is a little bit more like kind of tight, they're not like, they don't need to accommodate for the camera moving all over the place. Like they're able to really, I think the visuals are just beautiful. Like it's a really, really good looking game. Again,
it's kind
it's
of
like
funny that way. Like cinematically, it's kind of like a Resident Evil, like the old Resident Evils or something, where it's like a set perspective a lot of times, right?
Yeah. And in a way, it's almost like sort of like a parody of those games in a way, but like leaning into the mechanics of them, whether like Silent Hill, Resident Evil, whatever. But it's like kind of like Nintendo's take on them, but like just throwing Luigi in there and being like, let's add a little silly humor element to the mix as well.
And with one of the best fishing mechanics in any game.
That's
it is
fair.
A great, like that tug of war
fishing
is really fun.
That
And then you
always
get to
feels
do
good.
like every time, because you start like slamming the ghost back and forth. And I'm just thinking of like Razor Ramon. Nobody messes with the bad guy. In the WWF Superstars or whatever that game was. But oh man, it's just, and it's really cool how you can like grab ghosts and then like slam them into other ghosts. And that new like suction cup ability where you can like grab stuff, but it can be a little bit tedious at times. Like, man, I have to like again, back to that Professor
Yeah, then you
Layton
need
thing.
to,
I'm
like,
I'm
try
suction
it.
cupping
Right.
every single thing in the room.
Yes.
Does it stick to that? Can I throw it? Can I move it? It
Yes.
sticks, but I can't move it.
I think that's
maybe I'll
what
get more
killed my
powerful later. I
momentum.
better. Yeah,
Yep.
just like you're just checking every nook and cranny because there, in a lot of cases, there is stuff. Like I kept like staring. There was this one gem hidden, and I was like, I must have to come back for this later. And then I finally found like this plank on the wall that I could suction cup and then rip apart. And it's like, Jesus Christ, man.
I don't know if this is true or if I'm just misremembering it, but I do feel like at a certain point, coins stop spawning. And
Okay.
if that is any indication on how finely toothed I like combed every single thing, where the game was just like, no, you're not getting any more coins. No, you can't.
That's
there's
almost good to
nothing
know
left.
for me, at least. That's for my brain. I'm just like, okay, nice. Maybe I don't have to be so obsessive.
can
and then,
move
like,
on
if,
now.
if I find
Yeah.
out that like I need the money for something, then I'll start scouring. But like until I open the shop, which I'm kind of surprised I haven't yet. I feel like I've cleared 3 or 4 floors now, so I'm pretty surprised that I haven't. But yeah, I got a little bit past the Luigi moment, so I'm definitely planning on playing more because I really want to experience a few more of those puzzles. And it sort of feels half-assed to be like, oh, my resolution game, I played it for a couple hours. Okay, see ya. Not that I haven't done it before, but...
Hey, you played it, though.
But yeah, I am glad I fired it up. And it does have me kind of wanting to like go back and play more of the first one. And particularly, I remember people really like raving about Dark Moon as well. So...
Yeah, they
even
had
though I
really
know-
cool 3D effects for 3DS. That's probably the one I played the most, and maybe that was just a product of a time and place more than anything
you
else.
had
but-
it at the right time,
Yeah.
and that's how a lot of these games, like adventure type games, work for me. It's just like if I happen to fire it up when I'm in the right mood, then I get sucked in. But otherwise, I play a little bit, and that was cool, and move on. So
Because shoot, I remember like GameCube launch, some review outlets were not kind to the first Luigi's Mansion. They were
yeah.
very pissed that it was not a Mario game, and I did not pick that game up at launch because of that. Like, I picked
Yeah.
up Wave Race Blue Storm, and I think the first Monkey Ball might have been at launch. So like
Maybe,
that was,
yeah.
that was kind of the extent of it, you know.
oh man, Blue Storm. I just played the original Wave Race on the Switch Online recently.
Oh, right, yeah.
Pretty dang fun. Pretty dang fun.
Yeah, Wave
Holds
Race
up pretty
64
well.
is incredible. Give me another one
Yeah.
of those.
Yeah, Blue Storm wasn't bad, but it just felt so heavy. Like it just missed the mark a little bit.
I agree. It didn't quite feel the same. It's a decent game in its own right, but yeah, I don't know.
It just didn't have that arcade like
Yeah,
flavor to it or whatever. I
Yeah.
don't know. Like
And it
Wave
was-
Race feels like a Sega game almost on 64.
Oh, yeah.
Like
That's
it feels
kind
like
of
a
good point.
Daytona.
Yeah,
It has like
you're
that
right about
Daytona
that.
energy.
That's why I like it so much.
Yeah, I think it is why I like it too. I had never thought about that until just now, but I was just thinking about some of that Sega stuff, and I was like, yeah, it really does have that like go. Like
Oh,
the
yeah.
announcers are
It's just
very
nothing but
Sega.
energy. Just unrelenting energy.
Yeah. But well, speaking of Sega, why don't we toss the ball over to Randall's New Year's resolution from this year as well? I love that I'm not the only one squeezing it under the wire.
I know, and it's kind of my fault.
Well, you've put
Yeah.
in some time like before, like
Yeah,
it's not like you're
it's-
just
it-
playing it now.
I could have talked about this a long ways back, and I probably should have because I was playing a lot more of it at one point. I started playing it basically like almost right after I said I wanted to play this for my New Year's resolution. I started
Yeah.
playing it, and then this game called Elden Ring came out. And
That's
then
what did it. I should have known that's what did it.
Yeah, more. I'm sure we'll talk about that in the holiday episode, though.
You think?
Yeah, I think.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
But hey, this game might get a little mention too. But
Nice.
Panzer Dragoon Saga, 1998, Sega Saturn, Team Andromeda. It's 4 discs. It's they released it because PlayStation was putting out RPGs, as was the custom at the time, and they felt the need to do it themselves. And it's weird because the other Panzer Dragoons are all rail shooters, a la Star Fox.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
just gonna say, well, I wonder why they chose this series or whatever.
They needed an RPG, and I guess they were willing to do it with that. And but it kind of works. I'll be honest. It's like it's a little strange because rail shooter, like how much backstory or like thematic stuff have you really built up over time with rail shooter games? But there kind of is some there to poke around at with those other first 2 Panzer Dragoon games. So they kind of expanded on that, and kind of it's more kind of you're in that world, a la like different Star Wars properties. It might not be the same characters, but you're in that same, world and kind of vibes, I guess I would say, right?
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. It's like in my head, I know it's probably totally different, but in my head, I'm almost sort of picturing like maybe what Nintendo was going for with Star Fox Adventures. Like, oh, it's like Star Fox, but the same characters, I sort of different, I guess, same characters, but in like the world in a different perspective,
and a different
sort of,
in a different genre there too, right? Same deal. And they're trying to do a Zelda like in that case.
So what? For someone who their only background on Panzer Dragoon is that it is a rail shooter where you are riding a dragon.
You are riding a dragon.
And that is the extent of my knowledge of this series.
So this was probably my most. I own Panzer Dragoon and Panzer Dragoon's Way or Zwei or whatever. But I never owned them at the time. But we did have a Sega Saturn growing up, and I played Panzer Dragoon like they had like the first level on a demo disc, and I played the crap out of that and Bug. Those were like the two games that I just played the demos of endlessly. But beyond that, it was just like almost like a game that like existed in my mind almost. It felt like I'm just like fantasizing about this dragon shooter game, but I loved that demo.
Oh yeah.
So what is the like ball or like the very zoomed out version of what this game is, like the plot or anything?
What Saga is in particular?
Yes, in particular.
Boy is rescued by a dragon amongst kind of a wartime environment that's very like desolate and desert and everything else. And you come to find out that there's a couple of different warring factions in that region, the Empire and this Black Fleet. And, at that point, you have no allegiance to either. You're just kind of on your dragon, and you're kind of making your way through and finding other random people that might not have such strong allegiances to either side too. And in the meantime, you're running up against one or the other of those factions, both of which don't trust or like you, and you fight them separately. And sometimes they also come into contact with each other and don't like each other. So it's, there's kind of some layers there for the time period. And it's all voice acted in Japanese.
Nice.
Which actually is nice because, of the time, a lot of the English dubs that were happening.
98 was not a stellar time for dubs.
No.
Not to mention then like compressing it onto a CD-ROM when they're like already pushing the system to the absolute limits. Like, yeah.
Yeah, and you've got like just whatever developer in a corner was the guy like, come over here, Jeff, and record some lines to be the main character.
Right.
It's like, oh no. Thankfully, it's Japanese with just subtitles at the bottom, and they did a good job. Like the voice actors did a good job considering that this is a game that, at least in America, came out as one of the very last Sega Saturn games with a very limited print run and did not sell very well. Kind of like the quote unquote swan song of the Sega Saturn. So I'm just glad it existed, was able to come out over here in the first place.
Yeah.
So is there anything like that is like particularly sets it apart, or like even as a JRPG, or like ties it to the previous two rail shooter games? Is there anything like more like instead of, I have no idea.
I was just wondering the same thing. Yeah, I was just wondering the same.
Yes, thematically, definitely. As far as you're still riding a dragon and getting into battles, although those battles go completely differently. But the similarities are, you're riding a dragon. You're in kind of similar themed environments, I would say. And otherwise, the kind of thing that sets Panzer Dragoon, as a series, I guess, apart from say like Star Fox, is it's a rail shooter like, say, the first two and Orta 2 on the original Xbox. It's a rail shooter, but you don't just look forward. You can kind of look to the side or look behind you and shoot. So there's 4 different directions that you can kind of pay your attention to, and where enemies can come up on you essentially at any given time.
Kind of forgot about that. Yeah, I always remember thinking that was really cool when you could like turn to the left or right and just kind of see like, oh shoot, these enemies are like coming up from the side. Like,
yes,
just a really cool like cinematic flavor. That it added to the game.
And all of them have that kind of cinematic flavor, and I think that really comes into play in Saga. They really lean into that cinematic design, and it still does that. Attack from the side or attack from behind, but instead of being just rail shooter action, it turns into kind of like hybrid, not quite turn-based, more kind of like wait until your meter builds type of RPG battle system, which is really addictive. It's extremely well done. It's probably
this sounds cool as hell.
That sounds really sweet. Yeah,
I'm so mad.
I would say almost like the closest comparison, like rail shooter wise, to the first game, at least from my memory. Like it kind of reminds me of Rez a little bit. It might even be, is the Rez developer the same developer? I know it's Sega, but
it would not surprise me if there's
some
direct influence.
Yeah. Because just something about like the reticle and the aiming and the way you kind of lock onto targets and like,
Yes, which is definitely
not as rhythm driven.
Rez definitely pulls. Has to have been influenced by the more action oriented Panzer Dragoons with the like lock on reticle and release a whole bunch of lasers at the same time sort of effect, which is always satisfying, right?
Yeah,
where you have that like free flowing reticle with your analog stick and you've like let it all go.
It's so good.
Yeah,
even in Ecstatic from Punk Cake, which I know I talked about on the podcast, totally different type of game, but you have that like reticle, like with the cursor with your mouse, like let me just lock onto 10 enemies, release the button, boom.
Feels
it's just
great.
It's so satisfying in any type of game.
It is.
Guys, I miss rail shooters.
Me too.
I
love rail shooters. Man.
It's one of my favorite You're making me really want to play Orda, but this is honestly probably the most interested that I've ever been in Saga, because I've always just heard like, oh, it's like the JRPG Panzer Dragoon game, and I just kind of wrote it off. Well, I don't like RPGs,
right.
But now I'm like, oh, it has like a super interesting, like unique battle system that isn't just I just assumed it was like, a regular Final Fantasy-esque game, but just set in, like, I wasn't expecting you were flying the dragons around still.
And there's many layers to the battle system. So I was talking about how you can go in these, you can look in front of you or behind you, but you can also move your dragon essentially in 4 separate sectors, either kind of, and it's broke out into like, say it's just like a radius circle, and then there's like top, right, bottom, left, and you can move your dragon around, and in each one of those on this little mini radial map, there's different colors. If it's clear or green, it's a good place for your dragon to be. If it's red, get the hell out of there. But it takes some of if you're moving, your meter that you need to attack with is not growing. So you need to basically place yourself in a safe enough place.
Okay.
So there's a risk reward.
Constant
risk
reward.
This sounds so good.
Yes, this sounds awesome. I was just like assumed, this game's just a jumbled mess. No, this sounds amazing.
Yeah. And then you can choose to attack either with, you have a handgun, which you can upgrade or add different attachments to that you can buy or find. Or your dragon has their basic kind of homing reticle attack, which you can use, which your mana bar, your bar that you're growing has 3 separate tiers. So you can do different attacks based on how much that meter grows, right? So like a regular handgun attack might take only 1 out of 3 of your meters, but if you want to do a berserk attack, which is what I typically lean on, there's also a whole separate thing I could get into where you can decide what you want your dragon to be, whether it's more attack-based, defense-based, spiritual-based, which is these berserk special attacks, or agility-based, where you can move very quickly between those different sectors while you're in battle. Anyway, that aside, if you get to that at least second bar of meter or more, that's when you can unleash your berserk attacks, which take essentially your magic points. It's, and once you've, gotten that second bar, it takes both of those bars down back to 0, but you're unleashing this big attack that might clear And you're also being graded at the end of each battle for how much damage you took, how quickly you won. If you do it quickly enough and, successfully enough, you might get an extra item, and they'll say like great battle or close call if you if you took too much damage and almost died. If you let your meter go all the way up to the 3rd level, because it's an enemy that doesn't cause you too much danger, and they're not as attack heavy, that'll allow you to go all the way to the 3rd level. And as a spiritual based dragon, which I normally was, it allows me to refill those mana points. So like there's all kinds of these little systems on systems within the battle system that it's really like you can replay the same type of battle over and over again, and it's interesting every time.
Well, that's kind of like we were talking about before we started recording the episode proper, but like the Mario and Luigi and the Paper Mario games, like just like how much more that adds, just having like a little bit more. I know those are more like kind of have action driven prompts, and I don't know if this game has stuff like that as well, but like not just a little more depth to the combat where again, you're not just going in and like in Pokemon, just tackle. Like in certain games, it's just like I can pretty much just attack my way through these battles, or as long as I level up in a decently appropriate fashion, I don't really need to think about my approach to these battles much until I maybe get to like one of the main bosses or something.
Right.
So I don't know when a game, an RPG can make every battle engaging, it's like, okay, but are they random battles, or does it work like an enemy will kind of just swoop in on you while you're flying and then it like shifts gears?
It's random. It's random battles. So like that's more sign of the times that it's random battles. Okay. You don't see the enemy most often than not, unless it's a big boss or something like that. You're not going to see it. So, there is that downside, I guess. But, I never mind getting into the boss battles because then I'm getting more experience in them.
Yeah, when the battles are fun, a random battle isn't really a chore. It's only in like Pokemon when you're like, I'm just looking for like one specific thing, or I'm just trying to find this Pokemon, or whatever. That's when it gets tedious because it's like I don't really need to think about these battles. And then you get to the gym and I'm already over leveled because I explored too much. And I don't know. This sounds great. This is definitely making me think, because if you're not aware, Panzer Dragoon Saga, this is one that Randall's wife Tina got for him as a gift like years and years ago. But it is pricey video game at this point in time. So
yes, it is.
You definitely have me thinking like, is there a good Sega Saturn emulator out there? I kind of want to try this game, man.
I mean, that would be the way to do it, because they lost the source code to this game, so the re-release is not ever likely to happen.
Unless they build it from the ground up, and that's probably not going to happen. So,
but yeah, like great art direction, awesome soundtrack. Like I said, very moody. It's very much like a Gray Skies Winter sort of game vibe to it. I would say, nice. It's just got that going on, but not in a try hard edgy way. Just in a moody, laid back sort of way. That there are, I've been singing a lot of praises. There are on foot sections that have not aged super well, where you have to go into towns and, you're walking around and you have, like we talked about, a point and click adventure. It almost is a little bit that, because you have this reticle that you're moving around in those sections to look at stuff, whether on walls or otherwise. And,
like a DS game, but on a Sega Saturn.
Yes.
Right.
Basically,
Professor Layton on the Sega Saturn.
Basically, yes, but maybe a little clunkier and less streamlined. And then even like getting around and like, is that a path or not? Just some of like the 3D warbly effects that happens in like 32-bit 3D games. It's just like, this is
in like Final Fantasy VII, you're like, is this like pre-rendered? Like, is that a path? Can I go up that like slope over there, or is that just to look cool?
And there isn't really necessarily that much pre-rendered. It's just like it's like you can tell it's kind of barely holding together at the seams in some of these like areas. It's like the Saturn was not made for 3D. They just made it work because that's what the industry demanded.
Which is Sony is PlayStation has 3D. Itself. We need it.
Yeah,
like impressive on its face.
Yes.
No, it can definitely, and some of those games that kind of super blurry, like chunky, pixelated 32x 3D whatever can look kind of cool. It
I agree.
adds like a texture to the games that like there aren't like playing a Nintendo 64 game and playing a 3D game on Saturn is like night and day. Like they just don't. It's just a different feel. I don't know. It's kind of cool to see the evolution, I guess.
It is. And it's kind of weird going back because I don't necessarily like I was there at the time, but I didn't have a Saturn at the time or even a PlayStation at the time. I had a 64 at that time. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to go back that way too. But now I'm playing it through SCART, so at least it's clean, looking, and that makes it a little bit easier to see what I'm looking at. But yeah, no, it's like I said, I will talk about this on our holiday episode. That's for sure.
Beautiful. I'm really happy to hear that because I feel like, a lot of times these like classic and especially like the sought after, maybe they're not necessarily classics, but they're just like rare collector, hard to find, whatever. Like they're a lot of times not necessarily great games. They're just kind of like, it's just a rare collectible thing that didn't get many copies made. And because of that, it fetches a pretty penny. But it's cool when like, it actually, like this game warrants some like historical value or holds some historical value in the sense of like it's an interesting game,
I definitely think so.
Regard.
Yeah, and I'm trying not to conflate all of that like legacy and even the cost of it now with like the game it is. But I still
it's
think
so easy to do
up.
that. Like this game's like everybody loves this game, or it's it's super rare. It's got to be awesome. It's so easy to get caught up in that. For
like
sure.
even if this was like a $15 Saturn game that you could find in a bin, I'd be like, y'all should check this out.
You'd be like, you got to round out your Panzer Dragoon trilogy.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, yeah, I'm excited. You got me wanting to fire up any game in the series at this point, to be honest, because I'm just like, rail shooters, like John was saying, all about it. But yeah, why don't we kick it over to John for what you've been playing lately? I know you fired up something that's been sitting in your library for a hot minute.
The complete opposite of a legacy game that should be played to really see what it was at like pushing the boundaries of game design at its time. This game has been on my in my Steam library for a long time, and it's been something that I probably put on my wish list before I broke my computer. Then I was computerless for a decade, and like then when I like got access to a PC again, I was like, I never played this game, and I remember hearing about it a decade ago, and it is the game 10 million, and it's just written out as like the number, so it's like 10, comma 000, comma 000, and it, I believe, originally came out as a mobile game, and then got ported over to Steam, and it is, I think, a very indicative of what like indie game design was circa like 2012 or so, especially like mobile games. Like it wasn't a very rich and like you got a lot of like indie developers that were, there wasn't as much of a like, there was a lot of untrod ground, and so people were
just unexploring uncharted territories. It felt like sort of.
Oh yeah,
exactly.
It was way Wild West.
So playing this game now in the year 2022 is like, wow, there are a lot of just decisions that just would not be made today. Like it's what the game is it is a match 3 roguelike, where you are, and it's I think a quintessential phone game, because it is something that you would play on your commute, and you're just trying to get to a high score of 10 million, and that is when you beat the game. And as you do, like, you are your character that is very rudimentary pixel art, like sword and sorcery like proportions, but not with that level of style. And you are
like
just
that Atari,
or Commodore, like Pitfall, like that era.
Nice.
And stick figure pixel art, basically.
Exactly. And your character is running along a bar at the top of the screen above the like match 3 grid, and your character will run into enemies, and as you're like, the time will slow down as you encounter an enemy, and you will start to move. Your character will start to move to the left, and once your character reaches the end of the like screen, that run like ends, and you like get your total points for that. So you're trying to match staves for casting spells, or swords for casting that, or shields to like slow the rate that you're moving left, or items and such.
Okay.
So there's and then you're also gaining you can match ore and wood, and that will let you rebuild the starting area, which will give you more buffs, which will make you stronger. So like,
okay, this game sounds awesome.
I like that.
it's like the core concept is really good, and the like actual like mechanics of playing the game, like you have to play on Steam with a mouse, and it is so obviously better controlled on a phone with just like
touch screen where
dragging.
you just kind of
Yeah,
it's so much different, like having to move a cursor across the screen as opposed to just being able to point and touch at any point on the screen at like kind of a blink of an eye almost, you know?
Exactly. So like, it is a game that was made in the exact point in time, and it is just like a good concept and like a solid like thing, and all you needed was that, and you had a hit on the App Store, and that's all you needed. And like playing it now, it's like, okay, I'm in the beginning area, and I can't just enter into any of the rooms. I have to have my character walk across the screen to enter the room that will like lead to the upgrades. I'm like, this isn't a thing that makes the game bad, but this is just a mind-boggling choice today.
Yeah, quality of life decision. Yeah.
Especially for a roguelike or any game where you're just like playing, you know, hours on end or run after run or whatever it might be.
And like little things where it's like, oh, this like the music is mixed at a level that I probably wouldn't do it, and the loop is not clean at all.
Like there's makes me more mad than that. I'm just maybe it's the audio or musician in me, audio engineer, but I'm just like, why? How can they not? Whether it's in a commercial or a game, I'm like, come on, get that edit clean.
Yep.
And it's none of these are necessarily like bad or like even egregious levels of like little nitpicky flaws, but like, if this concept was made today, like the level of polish that is just like bare minimum like expected of every indie game is so much higher than it used to be like a decade ago.
Yeah.
And I didn't really feel that for a lot of the other games that I don't know, played from that era. Like that usually it's like, oh, you know, like graphics got better or like things got a little bit more polished. But like this was the first game that I was like, yeah, this definitely came from a different era of indie games. Like, and we talked a little bit about it, how like we were talking about the Faerun collection, which was another like iOS game that was like a Legend of Zelda meets Ys, or however you pronounce the Y.
Yeah, Ys. You are correct.
Yeah,
talking my language.
Like, you just move into enemies, and if you were strong enough,
it's
you
like
would defeat
roguelike,
them.
Kind of like in the roguelike combat where you're just like move up, down, left, or right.
Rogue.
If you move into an enemy,
yes, roguelike as in it is like Rogue and not like it has the functions of Rogue. But
that's amazing.
Like I remember also like playing Faerun and being like, yeah, this does feel like an older indie game. Like it just doesn't feel quite as polished, even though the pixel art looks gorgeous. Like the everything else about like single screen level design, puzzles are there, but it's like there's just something about it that just feels like it's from an era when like, I don't know, it was a little bit more. Oh God, I feel so fucking old. Like punk rock making an indie game, like
what indie game on mobile, especially too.
You made your own game, like that.
It was kind of like that though.
It was like the Wild West for a minute. You know, it was like, hey, if you can get an indie hit, you're maybe not a millionaire, but maybe a millionaire. You know, if you get a Super Meat Boy on your hands or something like that. You know, some of those mobile games. I mean, people made bank. You know. And it's funny that you mentioned, well, not necessarily funny because we talked about it a little bit beforehand, but since you mentioned Faerun, the developer of that one, Skipmore, they've made a ton of really cool games over the years. And I ended up just stumbling on like, I think it was just like on their Twitter page, I ended up stumbling on this game that they released for mobile, although I think you could play it on PC as well. But I just saw like this tweet and it was like, oh, you can, had a link right on it. So I clicked it and I was like, oh, you can play it right in your browser. And it's like this like side scrolling, kind of puzzle dungeon crawler. It was called Mamono Slayer, or I think possibly Monster Slayer is what it said in the tweet, but like the actual like logo said Mamono Slayer, if I'm pronouncing that right. But it's basically, you just have this like little, it's got kind of like a cool, like it definitely looks a little bit like a mobile game. It's from 2009, but had really tight, solid controls. Like you control it all by either swiping left or right. And it's kind of more like you know, you can't jump or anything, but it's kind of like a Monster Boy-esque aesthetic and layout, more low res than that, but you just kind of like have a sword that's like sticking out in front of you that like basically if you don't press anything, you're just stationary when you get to a new screen, and it just kind of like as you exit like the screen left or right, again, it's just side scrolling, but if you like exit the screen, it'll then shift to the next screen, and then you'll be stationary, and then you swipe left, right to walk left or right, and then up or down to go up a ladder, just tap to do like a quick stop. But it was just such a cool little like puzzly dungeon crawler. Like, again, you just got to be like, it's all about timing, like making sure that you like fall down and like are facing the right direction to like, because again, you're not attacking enemies, you're just walking into them with your sword sticking out. So it's all about like waiting till they get cornered or whatever, and then just charging them or whatever. But I don't know, it's just such a charming little, like almost like Game Boy Color aesthetic game, but just, I don't know, played like 10, 15 minutes, and I was like, man, kind of miss this era of just these little like mobile games. I don't know if it was ever available for purchase or whatever, but it just, I don't know, it had this like retro nostalgic charm to it. And I never really played games on mobile much, but like for whatever reason, I was like getting really nostalgic playing it and like kept thinking, oh, this is kind of cool. I'm done. And then I just kept like, nah, but I think I had found more, because you find there's a few little puzzles, like you pick up a torch and then you gotta light this thing, it opens up a new passageway, like it just the way the whole game was structured and kind of like you looped back around to solve more puzzles. It was just, I don't know, really tightly designed little game.
I wouldn't necessarily say I'm nostalgic for that era, because I do think like just the baseline level quality is so much higher these days. But like, I was thinking a lot about like, oh, like just the tools that everybody has access to is so much better than the tools that were available at the time. Like, it's night and day, like similar to like when I listen to like any electronic artist nowadays. And it's like, oh yeah, everything just sounds baseline so much better than it did like 10 years ago, just because like the equipment is so much like more easily accessible, and like people have solved a lot of the issues that like existed back then. So there's an era of growing pains, and I am very grateful for the efforts
we made it through.
Yeah, the efforts made back then so that we can have the quality that we have now.
That's really a great analogy too, because I feel like, you know, if you hear older, you know, and music that's made with electronic devices, like you can almost just like, oh, it's electronica. It all kind of sounds the same because it like had an aesthetic to it almost. But now it's like you can make music digitally and have it sound like absolutely anything. Like not like, it doesn't mean anything just because it was made digitally. You know, it doesn't mean anything about the overall like sound. So that's a pretty great analogy, I think.
So many, side note, but so many of our like lead guitarist friends have ditched their entire pedal boards for like an all multi-effects digital pedal board, because there's zero difference basically at this point between like the analog and digital reproductions.
Yeah, it's all about just like the collectability's sake, sort of. I mean, it's just like, oh, I want to have that like vintage pedal, but like you can really create some pretty awesome stuff with just software plugins and whatever these days. It's pretty nuts.
It's wild. Future is weird.
Yeah, wild west all over again. But but I don't know. Anything else before we wrap things up this week, guys?
Just that
holidays.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It's like, I kind of don't. I miss the Wild West of it all just a little bit, in that sometimes games or concepts can get a little homogenized while they get perfected to some degree, right?
Yeah.
There were some other ideas that we might have left behind without like fully exploring them. I just want to make sure we don't lose some of those things over time. But there's plenty of artists in different mediums that also feel that way, obviously.
I mean,
are there any particular games or whatever that come to mind, or just in general? Because I do know what you're saying for sure.
Yeah, just the concept of it.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a separate conversation. I don't remember who I had this with recently, where it's like, we have iterated on every idea so many times and so granularly that like it is now more possible to find something that resonates you like so like 1-to-1 with your desires, but because of like the sheer volume of it, it has become that much harder to find.
That's track
that
it down.
exactly.
It's like it exists, and it's almost more frustrating because you're like, I know it's out there.
Like,
I know there's the perfect game or the perfect band
point
out there for me. Yeah, but I can't find it.
Ugh.
Real talk.
The struggle is real. Oh, man. But no, that's a great point. But yeah, I think we can wrap it up there for this week. And like Randall mentioned, we'll probably be getting into our holiday wrap up episode next week, or at least very soon. If it's not next week, maybe there'll be a Save It for the Cast wedged in between there somewhere. But I think we'll wrap it up there. And as always, you can find us on the internet at pursuingpixels.com and pretty much everywhere else. And otherwise, we'll catch you next week, and take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, man, it is what it is sometimes. Even going back to some of the retro stuff, I mean, that's why I've leaned into more indie stuff these days.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there's still plenty of awesome retro games, but there are many times I go fire up a game and I'm like, oh, man, this is not as good as I remember it. Even the games I love.
No, that's totally fair.
Like, man, this one's rough around the edges.
Honestly, I kind of agree with you where, like, and I know we've kind of mentioned that before, where, like, indie games have supplanted that urge or that that missing piece that didn't exist for a good 10, 15 year span there.
Yeah.
Now all the indie games have been, built on the backs and were inspired by a lot of those retro things, but are just better.
Yeah. Just like, hey, what if those games didn't have all those limitations and all the rough edges and stuff?
Yeah.
Speaking of, man, I've been putting a little more time into Panzer Paladin. I'm coming around on that game a little more. Like, not that I was probably the most positive out of us, but like, I played the other day and I played like 3 levels and like didn't get a single game over. Beat 3 levels, like it was
must be nice.
Like, I was like, man, I'm pretty good at this game
Kevin's
now.
good at video games. Wow, doesn't get a game over. How nice.
I still definitely feel like all the stuff that we talked about, like the complaints on it, but I was like, okay, I must have just like been a little off the first day I was playing and like having some struggles. Like it's not anywhere near as good as it looks like it is. Like it looks amazing, and then when you play it, it's like, okay, it's just kind of a generic retro game, but like I am having fun with it again.
It
but
does have a lot of charm. Like,
yes.
Yeah, but a lot of that charm is the presentation. I can't deny that. Like, I do want to just see like what the enemies look like or what the worlds look like or levels look like. Like, that's half the appeal of the game.
The enemy AI
if not
is
more.
very fun. Like, I just like seeing a new enemy type and being like, what is this guy deal? How is he going to kill me?
Yeah. Because the first few enemies they show are just kind of like they're just marching right into you like just drones, or droids. And then like after that, like, oh wait, this guy's throwing a little wrench into the mix or whatever. So I don't know. I'm enjoying it. I'm looking for. That was the first thing I was like, let me just test some capture footage just to make sure this thing's working. And I was like played for like an hour or so, and I was like, oh man, I'm kind of sucked back. I thought I was done with this game, and now I'm sucked back into it.
Hey,
that's very interesting.